guys, it's Kelly here and I'm back with another video. Today's video, we are going to be concentrating on beginner tips for no line coloring. So what we are currently doing or what I see very often, and then what we can do to change it up. We are going to be using some new products from Honeybee Stamps. This set is called Every Happiness. It is my newest illustration from them, and I'm super excited to share it with you. I do want to mention before we get too far into the video that Honeybee, in celebration of their 11th birthday, is having a 15% off site-wide sale that includes the new release and all their everything they carry, tools, all of that stuff. And it is the April 15th, 16th, and 17th. And that does apply to their clearance too. So it's like an additional off. All right, so let's get into the actual tutorial. I am stamping the large magnolia and leaves with the Honeybee no line coloring ink. I like to stamp mine twice. You can stamp this in any light colored ink. If you don't have a no line coloring ink, just any light colored ink will do. And I've stamped mine twice so that we can talk about what we want to do versus what we have been doing. So the one on the top is going to be the one that we're going to make improvements upon. So the first tip when no line coloring is you do not want to go in and fill in the space in its entirety. Because if you go in and fill in the space in its entirety, you lose all of its detail. So instead of filling in the whole center and losing all of those little stamen pieces, I am going to use my darkest color, and I'm just going to do dots at the base of those stamen. Then I'm going to do a dot of my medium color over the darkest, and then finally the lightest. Because here, even if we try to go back and add in detail, it's going to be blobbier, and it's just not going to have as much detail. My second tip is if you do your first layer of color and you are not loving the result, go back. You can, as long as you're giving it time to dry in between with alcohol markers, you can go back over it with your darker colors again. I just did the same thing. The dots of dark color, dots of my mid-tone, dots of lighter color, and was able to get more dimension. So here, going in with our lightest color, I'm going to do that same kind of boo-boo that we talked about where we're filling everything in. Now, I've seen it where people fill it in with individual petals like you see me doing here, or where people fill them in, like just outline the whole flower and color the whole thing in. Either way you do it is going to just obliterate all of your detail. And then we're not going to have any idea where to add the things to give it its shape and dimension. So there's some of these petals that are like curling up over each other. Some of these petals that, are facing different directions. We lose all of that when we fill in the entirety of the flower and it just becomes a big blob. So then when we go to add our shading, we can follow the rule of we add shading where 2 points meet or where one object lays on top of the other, but it's still not going to give us a good dimensional shape of the flower. The other thing that I see often is what I call a wall of color, where we're not varying our lengths of our strokes. And so it's all like stops at one spot. And that gives it an unnatural look. So you want your flicks of color to be varying lengths so that it kind of breaks it up. So now what should we be doing? We want to be coloring with no line coloring. We want to be doing it one petal at a time. I know that sounds tedious, but once you get into a groove, it does go by really fast. And then here, I'm starting with my lightest color. If you're a beginner colorist, I cannot stress this enough. I was very heavy-handed when I first started coloring. And so if I started with my darkest color, then my whole petal was dark. So if you are just learning, start with your lightest color. First of all, lighter colors are less intimidating. They are also easier to cover up if you make a mistake. So if you put your shadows down and then later on you're like, ooh, that shouldn't be a shadow, you can totally fix it because it's the lightest color. So when we start with our lightest color, we're going to go lightest color, light mid-tone, darkest color. And we are going to go over it the first time. We'll see this a bunch more times. We're going to go over it the first time with all of those colors. And then when we work backwards from our darkest color to our dark midtone, to our light midtone, to our lightest color, we're still going to have lots of area that is for our lightest color or our highlight color. The other tip that I would like to give you is to color in the direction of the petal. So here, this petal is tipping up. It's kind of coming up, and then it does tip back a little bit. It has kind of a rounded edge. So when I'm doing my coloring, I'm kind of rounding my strokes to the shape of that petal, which looks kind of like a C, like a little cup. So you want to follow the shape of whatever object you're coloring. If you're not doing a flower, if you're doing something else, it doesn't matter what it is, just follow that same shape. So here, as you get more comfortable, I am now switching to starting with my darkest color. You don't have to do that. If you're not comfortable with that yet, then don't do it. Stay with starting with your lightest color. I'm being honest with you when I say, if you go back through my videos, I colored like that for years and years, because it served me very well in order to get more comfortable with my coloring and more confident, because practice doesn't make perfect for any of us, not even those of us, like, this is my job and I am not perfect, but practice does make progress. So as we're getting more comfortable with our coloring, like what we're seeing here, we are less intimidated by darker colors. Now, that is another thing. Up at the top, there is no darker color. Okay, there is no, they don't even have to be super dark. They just have to be darker than your highlight color or your midtones. I do have a tendency to like a darker color, like a really dark color. But if you don't put any dark in at all, you don't have any dimension. You need those shadows and those highlights, the light and the dark, to create that contrast, to give you the dimension. If you are too scared of darker colors to put any in, then your image will be flatter, which a lot of people that's not what they're looking for when they're, trying to learn how to color. So even if you're putting in a very little bit of your darker color, like here, you can see in a lot of these petals, I'm not being crazy with the amount of dark that I'm putting in. I'm really putting it in kind of toward the base where it's meeting the stamen, the center of the flower. And then from there, I'm extending it out a little bit, but I'm not going wild with it. It's not an overly dark flower. You can color, magnolias come in, different colors. I chose to go with the pink one today because I thought it would be the better combination to kind of show you the difference between the two. But you can also color them white with pink. There's like a purpley pink version. Just a white version, which is a whole different lesson. So anyway, I'm just going through and I'm adding in these little darker bits. Like, look how little dark is on this petal right here. It doesn't have to be crazy. But we do want to make sure that we're creating that contrast. So like this petal here is growing kind of like up, and it has that little, it's almost like a little V, at the bottom, where the petal's curling over. In order for this to look correct, the V part of the petal has to be lighter. So we want to make sure that we're putting the darkness of the bottom of the petal up against that lightness, and there has to be some contrast in between the two, or there will be no differentiation. There has to be some separation between the two in order for it to look the way that we want it to look. Now, here's something that isn't a coloring tip, but is just a tip from one colorist to another, from one card maker to another. When this is sped up, by the way, I did speed this up. When you are coloring something, it's right in your eyeballs, okay? You are nose to nose with your flower. And so if you feel like it's not blending as well as you would like, we have a tendency to want to go in there and continue to work it. You are seeing my flowers from a bird's eye view. And I can promise you that not everything is blended, because if everything is super blended, then again, we have no dimension, we have no contrast. So you do want a little bit of separation between your colors. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you have to use something wild outside of its color family, though sometimes I do. Like this, I chose this one in particular, this R80s family, because they are all R80s. So they all go together. But you don't necessarily want them to be super smooth and blended, because that's not going to give them any, like, a more realistic look. So now that we have both of these colors, you can see the difference between coloring one petal at a time, adding those darker colors, and following the shape of our flowers. So with our leaves, I'm gonna do the same thing. I'm just going to kind of fill this in as one block, so much so that even the two leaves that are next to each other, I'm just going to outline them as if they're one piece and then just fill them in. So now I've absolutely obliterated any lines there, to see which one's gonna go on top. Here, again, I'm going to skip the darker color. I am going to add the shadows where it's meeting the flower, but I think most of us at this point know to do that. Here, this one right here where they're meeting together, you'll see that they blur together because I've used the same darkest color. Now, sometimes you can't do that if you have a really dark shadow, but if you're trying to keep some separation between the two, I'm going to show you a little trick for that. Also, in order to give our leaves a little bit more shape, there's a lot of different ways that you can do that. But the easiest one is to add a little bit of shading where it's coming out from behind the flower, but then also add a little bit of shading where the tip is, and leaving that the lightest area, instead of it being at the tip of the leaf, it's going to be kind of in the middle. And by putting the highlight in the middle here, now I've worked all the way out to my darkest color, and then I'm going to work back in towards my light and extending it out. So going over that dark color and extending it out. So by putting the highlight in the middle there, we're going to give it a more round appearance. And you'll notice I'm not completely filling it in. I am doing flicks of color. So there are just little bits and bobs in there that are still white, which are going to highlight it. Again, I felt like it needed a little bit more darkness, so I just went back over it. You can play with it as much as you want. Just give it time to dry in between. So now I'm going to do this leaf the same one this way. And while I do that, I'm going to talk about how we're going to keep a little bit of separation in the other two petals. So when it comes to alcohol markers, and I'm using Copic markers, you can use Olos, you can use Ohuhus, you can use Spectrum Tri-Blends, whatever you got going on. Alcohol markers work the same way. I have my preferences, but everybody has different budgets, everybody's on different art journeys, and everybody likes different things. So these tips work no matter what you're using. But alcohol markers, typically your lighter color will pick up or lift your darker color. So when you have two objects that are next to each other like this, and it's not overly dark, and you want to keep some separation in between the two, I'm going to color the top flower the same way that I've been coloring them. I am going to try to make sure to leave a little bit of a lighter edge on the side that is over that smaller petal. I'm going to try to leave a little bit of a lighter edge, but I'm going to make sure that I use my lighter color over my darker colors. So then that way, when I go in to do my petal or my leaf that's underneath, I'm going to follow that edge with my darkest color. I'm going to follow that edge right behind the leaf. That light edge that we left is going to lift it up, and the dark shadow right next to it is going to push this leaf behind. If that doesn't give you enough darkness, then you can go back in with your darker color and just really drive home that darkness where it's right next to it, and again, push that behind. Alternatively, if you feel like your coloring and it has gotten too dark, you can use a lighter color. You don't have to use a colorless blender. You can use a lighter color of the color family you're using to kind of lift it up. So here, even there, this is where we're at. I hope that those tips help you to, kind of move through it. Everybody, like I said before, everybody's kind of on different art journeys. So if you are like, hey, that's kind of too much or whatever, just pick one tip to try. Okay, you don't have to do all of them. I know there's a lot of tips in there, but if you don't use darker colors, try using that one. If you typically build a wall of color where all your strokes are the same, try adjusting your stroke. You don't have to do them all at the same time, but these little things and learning these little practices will help you to become a stronger colorist as time goes on. Okay, so I kind of went back and forth about making this like more dramatic or not. I decided that I wanted to do kind of a softer watercolor background. So this is Altenews cold press watercolor, and I did end up trimming this down so that it is 4 by 5.25. And then I just picked some distress inks. I could have used regular watercolors, but that seemed like more work than I was interested in doing. So I just smushed these down on my glass mat, and then I sprayed with my spray bottle. I sprayed my background, and then I just started dropping some color in. This is Scattered Straw, Victorian Velvet, and Bundled Sage. They were the closest colors to the colors that I had picked. So I'm not trying to make them overwhelming. I want them to just kind of be soft and add some interest in the background. The watercolor paper is going to give me some extra texture in the background. Not to mention it's, slightly, it's off-white, so it's going to be slightly different from the rest of the die cuts. So once I did my little arch and I was like, okay, I need to extend this out, I just added more water to the sides and then proceeded to just add more color into that water. Watercolor works, the pigment will flow wherever the water is. So as big as you make your puddle, that's as far as your water is going to go. I do like a little bit of a splattery look. Not everybody does. If you don't, skip it. If you do, add it, whatever floats your boat. And then I'm going to set that aside to dry. So this arch in the set is one solid stamp, and that's to make sure that it doesn't get wonky when you're stamping it down, and that way it doesn't change the shape of it. I think arches are just super elegant and classy, and I wanted to include one in this set because we are heading into like Mother's Day and wedding season and graduation, and I really wanted something nice to pair it with. So I treated with my anti-static tool. I stamped in our gold pigment ink, and now I'm using gold embossing powder to sprinkle on top of there. Now I will say I don't know why I didn't do it at the same time. The sentiment in my head, I was thinking I was going to stamp it in like a rich kind of like raspberry color to match the magnolia. But then I was like, oh, why aren't you doing this in gold? Like, why not? So I went back and I did. I stamped it the same way, true with my anti-static tool, stamped it in the gold, sprinkled the embossing powder on, and then heat set that. And then I am going to line up my die cuts to cut this one out. For the arch, there is a outside die. You could cut it out as one solid piece and keep the middle. There is an inside die. You could cut out just the inside piece and keep the full outside. So that'd be great for a window or a shaker card. Or you can cut them both out to create a frame, which is what I'm going to do. So I set the one on the outside first, and then I tape it in place. Then I set the one on the inside and then finish taping that in place. And then I lined up the sentiment one. I chose Let's Celebrate because I go through more birthday cards than pretty much anything else. If for some reason I have like a wedding pop up, this would also suit for that because it just says Let's Celebrate. So there's a lot of different things that, I could use this for when it's time to give it. And then I ran these through my little Scout, which, by the way, mentioning of that sale, Honeybee carries more than just their own products, and it is a site-wide sale. So if you need plates, if you're looking for tools, if you're looking for machines, cardstock, envelopes, like all of those inks, all of those things are in there, and they're amazing. Not to mention this whole new release is fantastic. So here, the background is dry now. I did want to add some little gold metallic spatters as well. So this is Altenews metallic watercolors, and I am using the gold pearl to just splatter some on. I also like the Spellbinders one, and honestly, I looked for that one first, but I couldn't find it in my little watercolor drawer. I don't know what I did with it. I don't know what I did with it, but I'll have to find it. So, and then here's all of my die cuts. Doesn't that look like a little sticker? Like the little flower? It looks like a little sticker. I just feel like if I scanned this in and printed it out on sticker paper, my daughter would put it on everything. So anywho, here, this is the one that's, trimmed down. It's on a white card base. And then I'm just making sure I'm happy with the way everything is looking before I start gluing everything in place. I do love a dry fit. I can't help it. I used to kind of cut it out of the process because I felt like it made the videos longer. But now that I do more live streams and things like that, I find that I am trying to leave in those things so that you guys can really see the whole process. Here, I lost my mind. I don't know what I was doing. I don't know what happened. I was like, let me glue down this sentiment first when my flower isn't even glued. What am I doing? I don't know. I can't be trusted. I need a babysitter. So anyway, I then ended up being able to like pick the whole thing up. Thank God for Tombow Moto Multi Glue because it stays sticky, but not too sticky. Gives you a little bit of wiggle room. And then, so here, I'm going to put that in place. I'm going to get my sentiment straight because that is that is important to design. And then I'll be able to pick up the whole thing. Now, I don't know why, but I love a popped up frame. Even though I have to do this, even though I have to do all these little teeny tiny bits to get it to pop up, you could also like cut multiple frames and stack them up together. That would work as well. But I never think about it at the time, and I had already taken apart my dies. So anywho, the foam tape it'll be for me. And then I put this over everything. And then I do like to stand up in order to get these centered. So I put them on my craft mat, make sure that it's straight. And then I do stand up so that I can look directly down at it. And then once that's adhered, I pulled this out. This is also all of their, because they're getting new gem manufacturer, all of their pearl stickers and gem stickers are on sale too. So they're on sale and then you get an additional 15% off. But I pulled out Old Glory originally for the gold, but then there was like this pretty wine color. So I went with that. I added some shimmer to the flower. And then of course the white gel pen. No card is complete without the white gel pen. I added some highlights to my stamen. And then all of the areas where my magnolias are curling over, I added a little white highlight. And then here, so you can see how we started and then how we finished. I hope that this was really helpful for you in your coloring. Please let me know if there's something else that you think would be helpful to you. I'd love to be able to help. Don't forget to shop that sale good through tomorrow. Thank you guys so much for joining me. I always appreciate your time, and I'll catch you on the next video. Bye.